It's slowly. The dial is going. There we go. It's slowly. The dial is going. There we go. Okay, so I just wanted to welcome everyone tonight. It's slowly. The dial is going. There we go. Okay, so there we go. I had to do this. Okay, so good evening. Wanted to welcome everybody to joining us tonight. My name's Maureen Post. I am with the Cultures and Communities Department at Milwaukee Film, and we are here to talk about the documentary The Fight, which is screening through the Oriental Theater's SOFA Cinema platform. It is a documentary that takes a deep look at the ACLU. And so we are joined tonight with two local Milwaukeeans who very much work in the same social justice field. And so introducing you tonight with Laurie Cook-Daniels, the Policy and Program Director at Forge, and Chris Ott, Executive Director at the ACLU. So thank you guys both for being here. I'm very glad that you can join us for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for those of you who haven't seen The Fight, highly encourage you to take a look. It's an amazingly well done documentary. Follows 4 cases at the ACLU through the lens of 4 ACLU attorneys. And so I thought we could start, as it comes up often in the film, it's very intense, rewarding but exhaustive work. And so to start, if you both could just tell us a little bit about how you ended up working in this field, and what your current role at your respective organizations is.
Chris, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. So I probably first heard of the ACLU by name, at least what I remember is the 1988 presidential debate between Michael Dukakis and George Bush, the first, in which George Bush accused Michael Dukakis of being a card-carrying member of the ACLU, and when I heard that, I thought, like, this sounds like an organization I should check out. And so, I became a member at some point in the, when I was in college, and eventually a friend of mine who worked for the national office, which the film shows a lot of, told me about work that they were doing for LGBT rights in the early 2000s, and that's what sort of got me back more. Well, as I renewed my membership at that point, and I was working at the time for Fair Wisconsin, the LGBT rights organization, and that led me to, or sort of led to the chance to go work for the ACLU in Massachusetts. I'm come from Milwaukee, but had the chance to go out there in 2007, and I spent 10 years working there as communications director. And in 2016, while in the sort of election season, the job that I have now, for executive director, opened up. So I thought, well, I've been hoping to come back to my home state of Wisconsin anyway. Why don't I apply, see what happens? The election happened in the middle of the search, and I thought, if I can get this job, it is my duty to come back to my home state of Wisconsin. So that's how I came back here, and been, at the ACLU of Wisconsin for a little over 3 years now.
Gotcha. I mean, a very pivotal time to have taken over that role. So we thank you.
I actually started a decade before Chris. I came out at 16 and started doing LGBT work almost immediately. Back then it was all volunteer. We didn't have paid. There was no gay for pay at that point. So I worked on the 1979 March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights. I was the first lesbian at the Congressional Women's Caucus Fellowship. There were some years where I did more LGBT work than other years, but I had a partner who transitioned female to male in 1994. So that put me in the trans community. And that's where I mostly concentrated since, with a continuous sideline of LGBT aging and elder abuse work. So I joined Forge and moved to Milwaukee in 2000. And Forge at that point was still all volunteer. We got significant funding in 2009, and that's when we really started doing a lot of work, both locally and nationally. We've got two kind of arms that we do. So locally, we do group support, one-on-one advocacy, trainings, and public education. And nationally, we work on trans and LGBT victim services, particularly working with professionals who work with LGBT victims. So I do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it very much sounds like you both have had a background in LGBTQ rights and a lifelong connection to social justice and advocacy, which is commendable, and really also highlights those attorneys in the film that I feel also reiterated that just connection or desire to do this work. The trans community and the military was one of the 4 cases in the film that were really highlighted. So if you haven't seen the film, they really highlight that is one of the stories. The other is the separation of children at the border, the citizenship question on the census, and reproductive rights in government custody. All 4 of those cases having gone to high decisions in the last 4 years. And so I thought from your perspective, both of your perspectives, through your respective organizations, how did those changes in policy, whether temporary or permanent, really emerge and show themselves locally in Milwaukee and Wisconsin? I know that's kind of a big question, but if you want to speak to, 1 or 2 of those issues within the community.
I can start. I am going to have a problem with the barking dog, unfortunately. While I appreciate the film's focus on the trans military ban, that was like one of the least horrible things that the administration did to the trans community. We lost our protection for trans school kids like within the first week or the first month. They put out a memo at one point that would have made trans people non-existent, like whatever you were assigned at birth was who you were. So there's been just one after another of problems, rights pullbacks, and insults to the trans community. So they've been feeling like relentless and endless. And so because fighting seemed pretty ineffective given the mass of what this administration has done, Forge started focusing a little bit more on just helping people survive. Like, hold on until we get to a better time. Chris?
Sure. I mean, it's, so much has been going on. It's hard to even know where to start. But yeah, the administration has certainly not been any friend to the trans community, among many others. I mean, I hope everyone knows that we did get some good news just about a month or so ago with the Supreme Court ruling to strike down anti-LGBT discrimination across the country. Of course, there's a difference between a ruling like that and the actual implementation and ensuring that is followed. But still, that was a win, and a long overdue win. But I hope that is at least a step in the right direction, a significant step in the right direction, and a sign that even with a court that many people really feared what this court would do, and for good reasons. Progress is still possible. So I took some encouragement from that. And back to Maureen, back to your question about some of the other things. In a state like Wisconsin, we haven't been touched by all of the issues in the film in exactly the same way or quite as intensely, and yet still we see some of these things playing out here. For instance, the the administration's attack on immigrants and immigrant communities. We're not on the border the way that states like Texas or Arizona are, of course, but still we've seen a lot of stepped up ICE enforcement here, terrible treatment of people in detention. ICE actually tried to build a new prison in New Richmond, Wisconsin, kind of up near the Twin Cities, for those who don't know where that is. Fortunately, we pushed back against that one, working with local people in the New Richmond community. We managed to defeat that. It's been a tough several years at least, and so every win sort of feels a little David versus Goliath. So even some of these issues that can seem very far away are definitely at play in Wisconsin, and sometimes we win.
And Chris, I know I saw that, I don't know if you can speak to this more, that my understanding is that in Wisconsin specifically, prison reform has really been a focus of the ACLU's work in recent years. Is that specific to that ICE facility or in general prison reform?
No, it's in general. Thanks for bringing this up. Yeah, actually, one of our highest priorities across the country and in Wisconsin is criminal justice reform. And this is a problem. Many of the problems that we've talked about so far come from the Trump administration, or at least they got worse under the Trump administration. But not all our problems began in November 2016, for sure. And this country and the state have had a very serious problem with mass incarceration, unfortunately, for decades. And so we have a campaign that we call Smart Justice, which is has two main goals, which are to cut Wisconsin's prison population in half and to eliminate the racial disparities in our criminal justice system. That's a tall order. It's going to take a lot of work to do that, but we see we are doing this because it is so important to get people out of out of cages, essentially, who don't need to be there. We have thousands of people who don't really need to be there, it's the human aspect of this is the most important. But if we do this, our state would also save millions and millions of dollars a year. So that is yes, that is a priority for us.
In the film, they talk a lot about, there's a focus on all the accomplishments of the ACLU and through these different communities. But the film really focuses on the ACLU's ability to build a case and to see that case through and to argue that case in court, and how that, I think that most people see the ACLU as a civil liberties organization, but I don't think they necessarily understand the full extent of the legal action that the ACLU undertakes in these kind of crisis situations. And so I was just curious to ask Chris, I guess, kind of what does that work look like on the state level? And Laurie, from your perspective, how do organizations, advocacy organizations like yours, support that work or collaborate on it? So I don't know if maybe Chris, you want to start with that as the first part of that question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks. So with at least some of our cases, a lot of our cases actually, when we bring them, we do it strategically. We do a lot of preparation in advance. Are very careful about trying to find a case that we think has a good chance of achieving a result that will be meaningful for lots of people. We have to find good clients. There's a lot of work that goes into it. And one example of that that we've done in Milwaukee was the lawsuit that we brought in 2017 against the Milwaukee Police Department, challenging their program of essentially their stop and frisk program of racial profiling and stopping people without reasonable suspicion. That was a case that we spent a lot of time preparing for, lining up very carefully, and fortunately we won a settlement with the city about a year after that. So that's one way that things happen, but sometimes things have to happen much more quickly. And the film, the fight, shows one example of that in the fight against the administration's Muslim travel ban. which you might remember went into effect just a week or so after the inauguration in 2017. One thing that has become kind of a point of pride at the ACLU is that our national director, Anthony Romero, in the summer of 2016, apparently asked the legal staff or some group on the staff to prepare 2 memos about how we would respond to civil liberties challenges from the Clinton administration and how we would respond to similar threats from the Trump administration. And at least as the the legend goes, there was lots of rolling of eyes about why do we have to spend our time on the Trump memo? It's not going to happen. It's just a waste of time. Well, guess what? That came in really handy immediately, and we were able to do what the film shows. Go to court within hours, which doesn't usually happen because of some of that legwork being done in advance, or at least some of the the thinking first. And incidentally, and this hopefully is a segue to talking more broadly, and let's hear what Laurie has to say. But something that we at the ACLU have recognized even more in recent years is that yes, the work that we do in court is really important, but the organizing work and educational work that happens outside it can be at least as important as what happens inside the courtroom.
And this, I did not really think about what was going on outside the court. I was really focused on the court. What Forge has done is occasionally helped some legal group, I'm not even sure I know which ones we've worked with, find plaintiffs. Like we got someone who helped, became a named plaintiff in a lawsuit that challenged the Medicare ban on trans surgeries. So we've done some of that. The other more frequent way that we've played in is to sign on to amicus briefs, which is briefs to the court to give more further information about the lawsuit that's in front of them. So I was thinking more of those direct things with lawsuits, but yeah, where we've got major public education work to do, like around same-sex marriage or marriage equality. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of advocacy that goes on at the same time.
And I guess in thinking about that question, kind of a follow-up is, and I think this could go to either of you or both of you, but how have, as organizations that are fighting along the same lines of the same issues, have you found like citywide or statewide collaboration to be something that exists a lot in Wisconsin or in Milwaukee? And do you feel like it has been helpful and supportive in kind of moving towards progress in these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we certainly have at the ACLU. I mean, we couldn't do a lot of the work that we do, or couldn't do it as do as much of it, or do it as well without working closely with allies and people in the community, things like that.
I think on the specifically LGBT side of Milwaukee and Wisconsin, it's a little bit more hit and miss, particularly now that we don't have a strong state equality group. It's a little more hit and miss.
The one of the most interesting points I thought that comes up in the film, in the fight, is the idea that any civil liberties organization or issue has a cyclical nature, that it will be one step forward and two steps back. Understanding that both of you have worked in this for a very long time, and or even this last 4 years, a lot has happened. Kind of what are your thoughts on that, or what is your experience, or how do organizations play a role in that?
It is kind of cyclical. I don't know, if this is an internal ACLU saying or something more broadly, but we talk a lot about how the battles never stay won. So you just gotta keep watching, keep an eye out for new threats to things that you thought you had taken care of, and the ACLU nationally is celebrating our 100th anniversary this year. And, when we were founded in 1920, some of the issues that motivated our founders were things like attacks on immigrants, attacks on the free speech rights of so-called anarchists, open racism, including from the President of the United States. Some of that may sound familiar to people today. So, that I think, right there is an example of the cyclical nature of this work.
It's certainly been cyclical, just focusing on the LGBT, but I have to say that it feels like there's been nothing like the last 4 years in terms of the setbacks and how fast the setbacks came. And for instance, one of the things that I still don't understand is how we got to religious freedom includes the right to discriminate. I don't remember ever hearing that until the last few years. So it feels like they're even pulling new things out of the bag. Yeah, it's been a tough last 4 years.
Well, and I think that kind of leads to another question I had out of the film, is this idea, and I'm sure, Chris, I'm sure at the ACLU you have talked about this, but they also point out the difference between freedom of speech and hate speech, and how this might be a time when that line has become so critical, but also blurred and confusing in terms of organizations figuring out how you protect the freedom of speech, but also push back against hate speech or condemn it. So I don't know if either of you have any thoughts about how an organization kind of navigates that, or if I guess internally in your organizations, if there's complexity to dealing with that.
Let me just say that I'm leaving that to the ACLU and Chris. They get to balance on that knife edge.
Thanks a lot. Well, I'm not surprised. Well, it's a constant tension, or it's something that comes up in a variety of ways. And some people may know that one of the ACLU's most famous cases from the 1970s came when we defended the rights of the Nazis to march in Skokie, Illinois, a community where a number of Holocaust survivors lived. And of course, we didn't do that because of any affinity with the Nazis or their beliefs, but we felt that it was very important to to stand up for the rights of people whose speech we hate, to make sure that the government can't tell people what they can and can't say. And we sometimes take cases like that are especially difficult on behalf of unpopular clients, because if we can win on behalf of an unpopular client, that makes it that much, and that can make it that much easier to defend the rights of people that we agree with. That's the principle there. But it gets complicated, and we have especially been looking at that over the last 3-4 years, as Larry said, have been really difficult and challenging in ways that no one expected. And we are at the ACLU, we've certainly taken a closer look at the racial justice side of the equation. And as important as free speech is, we realize that there are people out there who are saying just hateful, threatening, terrible things against people of other races, against immigrants, people of other faiths. And they're getting, unlike in the 1970s when, the group in Skokie was, it was a very small group, and I don't think that, they even really showed up for the march after getting the right to do so. Now we have groups that are saying these awful, hateful, racist things, and they're getting support from the highest offices in the land. So, we need to balance that. It's not just that free speech always, we just always go for free speech rights. I mean, we're trying to look as closely as we can at what these issues mean to real people and how they play out in the community.
Absolutely. And to that point in the film, yeah, they do kind of compare Charlottesville and to Skokie, Illinois. And so in thinking that through, and I do agree that with the understanding of the approval from the administration for some of these things, I think a question for both of you over the time that you've worked in this is what impact has social media and or the internet kind of had on dealing with these issues or on, I guess, the idea of hate speech or discrimination, if any, I guess, in your opinion?
Neither one of us are going to talk.
There's so much to say about social media.
I have to admit that the last few years have scrambled my brain. I mean, I don't even know how to start with that. Chris, can you do any better?
Well, the first thing that came to mind, I mean, this is sort of, obvious in a way, but we just, good and bad, we find out about everything so much faster through the internet, through social media, than we used to. And that can be terrible when we're talking about ugly, racist, or other sort of bigoted things, sort of spreading through the internet, influencing people. But it can be good as well when people find out what's really going on, ways of getting involved, things that they might not, things that might have been swept under the rug. That have really sort of sparked people to action, and we've seen that. Of course, it was terrible what started it, but the murder of Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis. I don't know that we would have seen this nationwide reaction in the way that we have over the last few months without social media and without the power of online organizing that it has given us, or at least helped with.
We have made some decisions around our social media use. We are nationally, we're perceived as a transgender anti-violence organization, but we do not post on the murders. When another trans murder comes through, we figure people are going to get it through another venue, and we're going to focus on resilience and keeping the community up. So we've had an unusual dance with social media around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, you brought up the current protests in the wake of several murders over the last, in the recent months, I guess, specifically talking about. And so we see the ACLU being called in or coming to places like Portland to protect nonviolent protesters in the face of federal officers or police brutality. And I guess I'm just curious to know, at what point does an issue within a state move to like the national level of the ACLU? Whereas instead of just being a situation where the state specific ACLU agency is working on something, that it moves to bring in more and more national attention and or filing cases of that sort.
Well, one thing that is special, I mean, thank you for asking about, such another hot topic like this, but, something that is kind of special about the ACLU, if I do say so, is that, we have we call our state branches affiliates. We have an ACLU affiliate like the ACLU of Wisconsin in just about every state, and we certainly operate in every state. And so, that gives us a presence on the ground that not every organization has. So that's important to help us, pick up on what needs work. It helps us to do the work. And frequently, we reach out to our colleagues at the ACLU national office in New York or at other state ACLUs who may have dealt with something similar in the past or are currently dealing with something like that. And what's been happening in Portland is a perfect example of that. the ACLU of Oregon worked closely on that, that terrible and frightening situation with our national office. They had some successes. I haven't followed the details that closely over the last week or so, but they won a restraining order against the targeting and attacks against journalists and legal observers. And we had been talking with with our colleagues at the national office with an eye toward what might happen in Milwaukee, with the DNC coming to town in just a couple of weeks, with election season, accelerating pretty quickly after that. We're worried about protesters and demonstrators here facing some of the same tactics that we saw in Portland. I hope not, but we are, trying to learn from what happened in Portland and to be as ready as we can.
I just wanted to pivot then to something else that is very top of mind for everybody, and that is the current pandemic and the impact of that on our communities, on our lives, et cetera. And so I was curious to hear from both of you. Lori, if you want to start, how the pandemic and kind of the associated isolation that has come with that, how that has impacted. Both of you work in organizations that are very much driven by connection to human beings and being able to find out things that are happening to people, being able to help, et cetera. How has the current pandemic kind of affected the work that you do?
Well, the pandemic hit at how many years into the administration? It was like we'd had all of these, we've lost all of our, not all of our battles, but we lost a lot of battles with the administration over and over again. And people were feeling really depressed and demoralized and all that. And then the pandemic hit. And they were now not only depressed and demoralized, but unemployed and stuck in their houses. So what Forge ended up doing is pretty much a big pivot locally. We took all of our services online and really started trying to provide one-on-one services or group services with the idea of just trying, honestly, to keep people alive until the world turns a little bit more in our direction. So we went really basic. We went towards survival issues.
And Lori, just to follow that up, what would you say within your community and within the clients you serve, what is the greatest need right now, would you say? Or you can give like a top three, it doesn't have to be one, but what are the most vital needs as a result of the pandemic?
The trans community in particular, but also the LGBT community, larger community. It's mental health issues that are an issue. We've got in the trans community a really high suicide rate or suicide imaging rate. And so particularly the isolation is making a lot of that worse. So we're dealing with more mental health crises than we typically do.
And Chris?
And well, from the ACLU perspective, for one thing, of course, it was just like, we felt the shock that everyone else did. I think, it seems for the last several years, everything's been turned all the way up already anyway. And just when you think it can't get any more intense, how about a global pandemic? Yeah. So, there's been that aspect of it. And with the ways that we've gone to work on it, there have been several ways. We, in line with what we talked about a little bit earlier, our concern about incarcerated people in Wisconsin. We've been very worried about the way the pandemic, the pandemic getting into our prison and jail system, and hurting people there who depend on the state to take care of them. So we've been we've been really concerned about that, really urging the Evers administration to do everything that it can to get more people out. We definitely need to see a lot more progress there. So that's been one important aspect of our work since the pandemic started. In April, when we had the election, of course that made for a pretty chaotic election. We got involved in that. Helped to achieve some limited successes in terms of making it easier, at least a little bit easier to vote in those confusing circumstances. So voting rights is a big concern for us too, and we did what we could in April, and are still of course working on this as we head into elections a week from now and in November. And we're also especially concerned about the racial justice aspects of the effects of the pandemic. Wisconsin, unfortunately, in a variety of ways, has been ranked as one of the worst, or even the worst place in the country for African American children, African Americans generally. It depends on which measure you're talking about. But Milwaukee has a terrible problem with racial segregation, economic and other inequalities of all kinds, and the pandemic is making all of this worse. And so we're worried about the economic disparities, access to healthcare, the educational inequities that we started with and may now be being made much worse by the closure of schools and things like that. There's just a whole new raft of concerns that came with the pandemic.
I do have one question from somebody out there in the world. Are there any other movies that you feel are vital for people to watch about civil liberty issues? That's a very big, broad question. But if someone had, if The Fight is kind of sparking their interest, do you have any films that you would really recommend?
Sure. There's, a few come to mind, at least a few come to mind. There's in the realm of LGBTQ rights, there's a documentary or a film that came out a few years ago called Loving, about the Supreme Court case that I forget the year, I should know the year, 1967, the late 60s, went all the way to the US Supreme Court, an ACLU case. Went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and struck down the remaining state bans on interracial marriage. So that's a great one for people who are interested in that issue. There's another one that is a little more fun, although it still deals with serious topics, and it's about 15 years old at this point at least. But Enemy of the State, with Will Smith, looks at the surveillance state, which is still, it may not be top of mind for people in the midst of the pandemic and, some of the other problems that we've had to deal with over the last few years. But the extent to which the U.S. government has been spying on all of us, that film kind of previewed some of that. So, it's a work of fiction, but unfortunately, a lot of that has come to pass.
Maureen, let us ask you.
Oh yeah.
Well, actually, I was thinking while Chris was talking, I was thinking after I asked the question, I was like debating if I could, I was like, I asked the question, but I would shamelessly plug the fact that we are having a Minority Health Film Festival at the beginning of September, which, as Chris was talking about how many things, all of the issues that are simultaneously happening during the pandemic, where you're dealing with so many health disparities, income inequalities, educational possibilities of achievement gap, all of these things. This is a festival that has kind of curated a combination of documentaries and feature films that really look at that. So, it is coming up September 10th, but I would highly recommend that for anybody. And a lot of conversation within just basically everything we've talked about today, I have to be honest. So there'll be a long list of films in there. But to be honest, none of them that I had seen before. So I think that only speaks to the fact that there are a lot of films out there that look at these topics and that are good to get involved in.
Has anyone made a film about Forge yet?
I know, right?
The
If not,
office,
they could.
the Office for Victims of Crime has a film that we were in.
Really?
Little tiny one. It was for the National Crime Victims' Rights Week, I think in 2015. So that's it.
Still time for that. So the other question that was asked, and I know we kind of talked about this before we actually started the discussion on YouTube, but the idea of that the organizations do all this work, but the idea then of what is most important for people in the community to do, or how can they best get involved? And I think that is a more complicated question because of the pandemic and the, the potential limitations that puts on things. So any insight you guys would have would be great.
One of the huge losses for me when the pandemic hit is we were just getting ready to launch We Teach, which is the Wisconsin Transgender Education and Advocacy Coalition. It was We Teach. So we were going to do a coalition of both service providers and community members looking at a number of ways of moving policy along and moving the community along. And I finally had to give up when we got the group couldn't be more than 10. We couldn't bring more than 10 people together. So we're still hoping to redo that when the pandemic goes away. So that would be a structured way that people could do it. But I made a quick list of a lot of the ways that we and other people try to influence what's going on in the world. I mean, some of what we've been talking about is public education, where we're trying to break down stereotypes around immigrants, around people of color, around trans or LGBT people. But some of the other things that people can do, obviously, we've got the protests. Forge signs a lot of letters to legislators explaining what it is we want and why we want it and what the data is. We do a lot of commenting on regulations, particularly last 4 years trying to stop regulation changes, but that's another way in. Meetings with legislators. We do a lot of professional training. One of the ways that we get in with people is we come in of, you're a professional, of course you want to do a really good job. And in order to do a really good job, you've got to know these cultural pieces so that we kind of sidestep whether you have to agree with these cultural pieces. It's part of your job to do a good piece, a good service. Forge has consulted on some national protocols, like we managed to get the National Sexual Assault Exam Protocol to include trans issues. There's speaking at hearings, there's mobilizing people to help you with all of the above. One-on-one conversations, we cannot forget what the data tells us about how it's knowing somebody who's LGBT that makes the most difference in how someone views LGBT rights. And I suspect that's true in other cases as well. We do a lot of social media campaigns, just basically trans people exist. And we also do the old fashioned stuff of publications and fact sheets and webinars. So we're trying, I think there's a lot of ways that you can start, you can help make an impact. And some of them require a little bit of professionalism and a lot of them don't. A lot of them, anybody can just get working on it.
You spoke, can I just ask real quick, Lori, you spoke earlier of just the current somewhat immediate need for help with mental health. Is there any specific avenue or organization to donate to, or anything that people can do to help alleviate that in this time?
Well, we will not turn down anything, any donations. We have partnered with Freighter's Inclusion Health Clinic to try and bring programming closer together so that we can tie people, get them help more closely. Um, One of the things that I think is really helpful and important is the community cares um, exchanges that have been set up to try and match volunteers with people in need. Those are really helpful. Forge has one of those, and other communities have those as well. So that's another way to be hands-on getting people help.
From the ACLU side of things, you know, we for a long time, you know, we've done a lot of trainings and you know, tried to offer ways for people to get involved. And so, of course, we've had to take that all online over the last several months during the pandemic. And so, you know, at least once a week, sometimes several times a week, you know, we have something kind of like this, you know, panel discussion about, you know, various issues, especially for our Smart Justice campaign to decarcerate. We've done a lot of work on that. So there are lots of ways for people to, you know, tune in and learn more and get involved. Just last week, we did a training for more legal observers to go out and you know, try to make sure that the rights of protesters are being respected. I think we had something like 180 people on the training, the most recent training for that. We've you know, we're trying to enlist people to you know, to make the need for criminal justice reform a campaign issue during election season. We're trying to enlist people to help out with voting rights work this year because, and one way that we're doing that is that Wisconsin, unlike a lot of states, a lot of the responsibility for carrying off elections successfully, which of course is trickier now because of the pandemic, rests with our 1,900 or so municipal clerks. And so we've created a kind of kit for people to, you know, to go to their municipal clerks and, you know, ask to, you know, offer help and to ask them to make changes to make these upcoming elections go as smoothly as possible. So there are all kinds of ways that we are still trying to, you know, provide trainings, give people ways to get involved. And if I can make one more plug for that, on August 27th, we have our annual meeting, and that is, you know, of course, we'll be online, and you know, we'll be doing an overview of our work over the last century or so, as well as you know, what we're doing today.
Very cool.
Chris, how would you get how would someone get one of your kits to work with the local clerks?
Oh, thank you for asking. It's our website is aclu-wi.org, and so, you know, the things that I've mentioned are all there, and of course on social media, you know, we've been distributing this through Facebook and Twitter and in other ways as well.
Well, I want to thank you guys for your time. Also give you a chance to add anything else in. And then I just have one additional question. I feel very warranted, but we talked a lot about a lot of heavy, not so great things currently happening in our society, in the world. What is, if you want to speak to something that you feel like you can see that this point in time is going to, the silver lining of this, something that you are hopeful about or that you see as a good outcome of all of the current struggle that's going on?
I think that you know, one thing that maybe many of us have learned the hard way over the last few years is not to take anything for granted. We, you know, well, you know, we just can't take democracy and all the things that that make it work for granted. And one other thing, you know, from the film, the fight itself, that really struck me is that there's, you know, there's one part where, you know, the attorneys and others that they are profiling in the documentary read the hate mail that they get, and or play the hateful voicemail messages that they get. And I could really relate to that because we get our share of that here in Wisconsin. And sometimes people, especially around Christmas time, people send us some really nasty stuff, or they wish us a Merry Christmas with this kind of malice, as if like we will melt or something like that if someone wishes us a Merry Christmas. And when we get those things, sometimes we just put the cards up on a bulletin board or on display somewhere. It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
But to me, this is maybe not directly responding to your question, Maureen, but it shows both sort of like what we're up against in some ways. Can't take anything for granted, and I'm just so grateful for the support that we've gotten from so many people for 100 years, but especially over the last few years.
That was probably the thing that most struck me about the film, was the amount of time that was spent focusing on the lawyers' faces as they tried to cope with what was going on. The emotional toll of the work, I just have not ever seen anything that showed it so well. And we do not put the nasty letters up. We try to, where our staff, we try not to circulate them because they're just too painful. But I will say that I think when Trump was first inaugurated, like many people, I was really despondent. And you can see I put stuff on my wall above my desk, and I cut out all of the Women's March pictures I could find and put them up there. I had them up there for about 2 years, just to remind me that there was mobilization, that there were people who were out there doing things. And I think particularly now, what we're seeing with the public opinion about the police, about racism, we're seeing major moves forward as a result of what's happened. I'm pretty sure we have seen major improvements in attitudes about immigrants. Just when you fight these battles, you collect more supporters. You get more people to understand what's going on. And so those are the pieces I'm holding on to.
People have really had to take sides in the last few years in a way that maybe they didn't have to before.
Well, I think a lot of people just went through their lives and then, kind of like what you were saying, realized we can't take it for granted. If we do not fight for immigrant rights, they're going to get thrown out. So I think people are really getting it more and getting more involved.
Great to hear. Well, I really appreciate both of you joining us tonight. Very much admire the work that you do, and grateful to have you guys in Milwaukee. And hopefully we will have you back for another discussion while we're in this virtual world, and someday in person again.
Great.
Yes. So thank you for being here. Again, you can watch the fight on Sofa Cinema through orientalmke.org. Okay. Thank you guys. Have a great night.
Yeah, thank you both. Take care.